You will have seen the words of Dmitry Peskov, the spokesman for Vladimir Putin, yesterday. I mean, first and foremost, your reaction to what he said to Mark Austin?
Yeah, firstly, well done for Sky to securing that interview. It was important for us to hear the diet of news that the Russian people are experiencing. We, as you reported, must brace ourselves, I think, for more horrors to be revealed, more war crimes to be exposed as Russian troops withdraw. But the spokesperson, Dmitry Peskov, was very, very clear. This is far from over, and there is another dark chapter soon to follow. So there's some big questions for NATO and the West. Our confidence is no doubt building. We're improving on our decision-making to take risk. But I make it very, very clear, there's so much more we need to do. We continue to leave Ukraine to do all the heavy lifting. We need to provide greater weapon systems and stop having simply daft arguments about whether weapon systems are indeed defensive or offensive. What's going to happen next, as far as I can see it, is a focus on Russia in the Donbass region and indeed in Odessa. And Odessa is a critical port in the south. If that falls, Ukraine will become landlocked. The vital grain exports that we all depend on will not be able to get out. But more importantly, Putin will be able to declare a win. What we should take away from that Peskov interview is the fact that Putin is very secure in his job. He's not scared of any war crimes. He's not scared of breaching the Geneva Conventions. In fact, he's taken advantage of the West's timidity. We've given him space to conduct these horrors, and that needs to stop.
If Mr. Ellwood, and certainly I'm not disagreeing with you, there's plenty of evidence that Vladimir Putin is no fan of the Geneva Convention, but if there is a risk of him, breaking once again the Geneva Convention, is this the time for Britain and others to therefore be supplying those heavier armaments, those heavier munitions that Ukrainians are calling out for? I mean, the reason we didn't up until this point, the stated reason was, well, there were concerns about Russia declaring as becoming a party to the war itself.
We need to have better confidence and understanding of the escalatory ladder, as we did during the Cold War, of what we can do in the theatre of operations in Ukraine to support Ukraine, aware that we need to control this and not, as people are too worried about, causing World War III. But we've been too easily spooked by the Kremlin rhetoric. Britain has done more, I have to say, than most other countries, than I think in nearly every other country. Firstly, prior to the invasion and then after the invasion as well. But because NATO itself won't give the blessing, won't endorse greater hardware to be put in, we're now seeing a public bidding war between countries like the Slovak Republic, putting in the tanks, Poland wanted to put in MiG aircraft, Australia now sending in APCs, and indeed Britain as well. This shouldn't be done in the public gaze. This should be quietly done behind the scenes, understanding the need of the Ukrainian people, getting the equipment, getting the ammunition, getting that across. We're doing enough right now to ensure that Ukraine doesn't lose, but not enough to ensure that they win. Let's get on with this. Let's be more robust in standing up to Russia in Ukraine. And let's focus on what they need to protect Odessa. They need Harpoon missile systems. If we were very bold, we would send an international maritime NATO task force to patrol the international waters off Odessa. That would be a statement to Russia to say, we are now taking this seriously. We're going to stand up to you.
I mean, NATO, of course, one supranational organisation, another is the United Nations. And, yeah, Russia has been ejected from the UN Human Rights Council. But if you look at the vote there, 24 countries voted against, 58 countries abstained. We've heard an awful lot in the past couple of weeks about a unity of purpose with those opposed to what is happening in Ukraine. You look at the figures on a vote like that, and that kind of unity of purpose doesn't seem quite as clear.
Yes, and you're absolutely right to point to that. The success of the sanctions, that they will take a while to bite, is the fact that the entire international community has lent into that. But that vote itself did expose many people that continue to sit on the fence, people like South Africa, Brazil, India, and so forth. We need to work with these countries to make them understand that this is against Putin, against the regime, not against the Russian people. The more countries can stay united on this, the faster that we'll be able to move and support Ukraine. So it was an eye-opener, and it shows that there's much work to be done by the international community, not least Britain and the United States.
We've just been looking at pictures from Borodyanka, and of course that we heard from President Zelensky yesterday responding to the accusations of war crimes that have taken place in Bucha, that we could see even worse there if such a thing is imaginable. Just though in terms of the process of securing a declaration of war crimes having been committed, given that Russia, given Russia's disdain for the International Criminal Court, what prospect is there?
Well, it's not just the disdain of the International Criminal Court. They left it in 2016. So I don't think there's any chance of getting Putin, or indeed even a general, let alone a soldier, to turn up in the Hague anytime soon. That shouldn't stop us from collecting that evidence. But we need to think of what new vehicle needs to be created to be able to hold these people to account, because it begs the questions about our international rules-based order. The reason why both Russia and, to some extent, China are able to exploit our international rules is they've become so rickety, they've become rather wobbly after 50, 70 years since they were created after the Second World War. The fact that China and Russia has a veto at the United Nations Security Council shows how impotent these organizations have become. Yet we now see state-on-state warfare take place in Europe. There's a lot of rebuilding to be done.
Sure, but isn't it almost even simpler than that? We heard from Vladimir Putin's press secretary yesterday, the same as we've heard from their ambassador to the United Nations. When the evidence is put in front of the Russians, clear, compelling evidence, prima facie evidence of war crimes, they just say, nope, we didn't do it. And in circumstances like that, we have to be concerned about their own limits on their behaviour, don't we?
Yes, and again, this is what's been exposed by this war, is Putin's disregard for Russian life itself. He doesn't care about the soldiers that he loses. He's considering the legacy that he's trying to create here. He wants to expand Russian influence in the Slavic arena of Europe, which is why I'm afraid the penny still hasn't dropped, that this isn't just about Ukraine, that we continue to bench the NATO forces, the most formidable alliance in the world, as we watch these activities, these atrocities take place in Ukraine. It begs the question, what scale of atrocity, what scale of war crime, what scale of breach of Geneva Convention must we witness before we actually up our game and actually move in to support the Ukrainian people in the way that they've requested?
Mr. Ellwood, whilst we have you, I do want to ask you about Rishi Sunak and his wife's non-dom tax status. I just wonder, I mean, I saw someone quoted in The Guardian this morning, a Tory MP, but admittedly one that was described as a friend of Boris Johnson, saying, look, if Rishi Sunak is as rich as he is, richer than Croesus, to have his wife having non-dom tax status at a time that he's putting up taxes is a bad look. I'm just wondering your view on that.
Every minister, when you enter government, has to make a declaration, and that declaration is confirmed to be legal before you can take up the post. So there's nothing illegal about what's been done by the Chancellor whatsoever. If there are bigger, more fundamental questions about the existence and of the non-dom status, that is something for us as a country, perhaps, and indeed Parliament, to debate. But the idea that we focus on this discussion about following the rules that actually exist at the moment, I think is a distraction from what we need to be focusing on, which is the previous subject right now, of what Britain is going to do to help and lead other countries support Ukraine.
Yeah, I do get the point that there are certainly bigger topics around than Rishi Sunak. At the same time, the Conservative Party have been in power since 2010. Lord Ashcroft had to give up his non-dom status so that he could continue to sit in the House of Lords. I mean, this has been something that has been circling around Tory ranks for quite some time.
Right. And there again, you go back to my point. The rules are there. If the rules as a whole need to be changed, let's have that debate. But that's away from Rishi Sunak's wife. That's more to do with the existence, the continuation of the non-dom status and the privileges that you gain from that. In my view, they are out of date. They do need to be reviewed.